the fact that they moved them 1,000 miles, and we have examples. There's a stone called the Russian Thunderstone. Have you heard of this?
No.
So like in the 1700s, they took a big lump of, I think it's granite or something like that, from Finland, and they shipped it to St. Petersburg, and they carved it into a statue. It's still there today. It's the Thunderstone. It's an edifice. It weighed. That's it now. Yeah, that's the finished one. This image here is the right one. Yeah. So this is how they did it in the 1700s, the Thunderstone, and they moved it around 100, 150 meters a day. It took them forever, and the only way they did this was by basically sinking giant logs into the ground to give them a leverage point for these capstans, and they'd move a system of rails, big steel rails with steel ball bearings behind it. It weighed about 1,500 tons, and just over a period of just very slow grinding and turning with capstans and pulleys and these steel tracks, they move it about 150 meters a day. It took them forever. And in order to get that thing across the water from Finland, they had to construct a giant barge, like a huge barge, and on each side of the barge they would tie up 3 warships just to try and keep it stable. It's about the same size, same mass as the obelisk that's sitting in this mountainous quarry in Egypt, in Aswan. It's still in the ground. It's like 1,200 tons of granite. And you're expected to believe that they somehow were going to lift this thing up out of a quarry over these like basically big hills and mountains of granite and put it on a little ship that's narrowed in this, they call it the harbour there, and it's this tiny little space. I'm like, you're absolutely delusional if you think this was a simple task that could be achieved with primitive methods, and then ship that thing 1,000 miles somewhere. It's
when you speculate, when you sit around by yourself, because you've thought about this a lot. How the fuck do you think they did this?
Look, I
take a wild
ass guess. I think there's connections possibly to gravity manipulation. I think anti-gravity had to play a part in moving some of this stuff. I actually think there's some connections to some of the work that's being done with this plasmoid implosion technology, the stuff that Randall's been looking into that's coming back to talk a little bit about. The relationship and the sacred geometry aspects of that are similar to the things that we see in some of these cultures in the past. So that may potentially have something to do with the methods that were used in the past. But I'm convinced it was a form of advanced technology. Now, whether it's our form of technology, because let's face it, we can do things like that today, but it takes hydraulics and diesel powers and cranes and all that stuff. They may have had an entirely different avenue of tech, and that you open up into the realm of resonance and acoustics and anti-gravity. I think resonance in particular might have played a strong role, because that's certainly a feature that you see in some of these older structures, whether it's an accident or not, but some of them are incredibly resonant. The Great Pyramid generates a tone just on its own that comes from the earth in there.
It generates a tone.
It does. It generates a low tone. It's basically coming from the earth. You can hear it,
or is it?
If you're quiet enough, you can, but it's certainly been picked up in a whole number of different experiments where they're measuring the tone. The whole structure does generate a low tone. It's an interesting thing. A lot of these places that typically have a connection to underground water as well. Like we know there's water beneath the Giza Plateau. Places like the Corkrancha in Peru, which is also a giant megalithic building. There's an underwater river near there. We always see some form of flowing water associated with it. Whether or not that has something to do with it, I don't know. But it's just in that realm of, I think the answers lay in realms of science that are outside of our current understanding, that we should be approaching with an open mind, because we might ultimately learn something from it if we do. Instead of just dismissing it, putting it in a box and said, you know what, we're superior to every civilization that's lived before.
Right.
They're primitive. They did it with primitive methods.
Right.
Done.
Right.
All things are a frequency. All things operate on resonance. And by the way, a quick little bizarre similarity when you're mentioning anti-gravity, that Dr. Chan Thomas, who wrote the Adam and Eve story, he was researching anti-gravity for McDonnell Douglas back in the 60s.
Listen, so Jamie, put that back up, please. A recent study published on Ancient Origins website claims that the ancient Egyptians benefited from the sound in the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza and relied on the discovery of a dead end in the rock inside the pyramid room as a tube of acoustic resonance that generates ultrasonic waves at a base frequency within 5 hertz. This raises the questions of the importance of ultrasound for the ancients, and can we find the use of sound waves between ancient cultures elsewhere in the world? Wow.
Yeah, all the boxes too. The Serapeum is an incredible site that houses like 25 of the biggest stone boxes you'll ever see. It's this one spot, and they're the biggest ones. They're like, some of them are up to like 70 tons with their lids 30 tons. And I've been there with some people that have been measuring like the frequency resonance range inside there. So at what range are you generating standing waves? And they all seem to have a very similar resonance tone to them. So it's an interesting experiment. Like you can stand inside a water tank or a concrete room and find a resonance. But it's interesting to go and actually analyze those aspects of these ancient structures and to speculate maybe has this got anything to do with what they were made for? Because these are giant precision-made boxes made from syenite and granite that are perfectly flat and square, and they're just massively solid. They went to tremendous effort to remove imperfections from the stone, no cracks, almost like they didn't want the damn things to shake apart or vibrate.
Well, it's just the sheer scale of them. Like it flies in the face of logic. Like the actual archaeologists that want to lock this down and try to come up with some sort of a conventional reason and, some sort of an explanation that we can all get behind. Oh, they used pulleys and pushed them on logs. Like, shut the fuck up. Yeah. Just shut the fuck up. What you're saying doesn't even make any goddamn sense. It's way more likely that there was incredibly sophisticated technology that existed, and it's way more likely, in face of the evidence of the Younger Dryas impact theory, that shit was wiped out. And that we're talking about a really advanced civilization that lived a long time ago that's more advanced than we are today, but moved in a different direction. Like we moved in the direction of combustion engines and electronics, and they moved in some other direction, but achieved maybe many thousands of years more sophistication in that direction than we have with our internal combustion engines and electricity and all the shit that we use.
And it's important for people to understand that these primitive methods that are suggested and pushed very hard by the, quote, mainstream, they don't test any of these. Like, show me them moving, 1,000-ton stone on logs. Let's see that. They've never cut one single box, like you said, in half, or even completed one single average size box, or any box. And when I say box, I'm talking about a stone block with the primitive methods.